Hey everyone, it's your host, Jason. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that's right out of the history books. We're heading to the sunny California coastline with beaches, celebrities, and a laid-back vibe. But we're not here for the surfing, although it's good, or the movie stars who are mostly weird. We are on here to uncover the moment World War II literally landed on America's shores. I'm talking about a real-life military attack on the United States. The attack made headlines around the world. It happened in a place you'd least expect, the quiet and sunny beaches of Santa Barbara, California. Most people think of Pearl Harbor when they hear about World War II attacks on U.S. soil. That surprise attack in Hawaii is forever etched into our country's memory. But that wasn't the only time the Japanese attacked American territory. Just 2.5 months after Pearl Harbor, the war came knocking on Santa Barbara, California's door. An enemy submarine surfaced off the coast and for real opened fire on the Elwood oil fields. It's a scary thought. For a brief, terrifying moment, the war was right here. Imagine being a student back then. You're living your life, going to school, listening to the radio. Suddenly, the sounds of war aren't just on the radio anymore. They are the actual sounds of war echoing down your street. That's the perspective we'll take. We'll see this through the eyes of someone who was there, a student whose world was turned upside down. We'll figure out what happened that night and figure out how a little beach town in California became ground zero. This story is history. It's a reminder that history can unfold anywhere. It's also about bouncing back and remembering our past. This is our adventure, looking back through history with some extra details. We're digging into the finer points, the type of submarine, the shells that rained down on the coast. So grab your gear and get ready. We're about to embark on an expedition into a forgotten time in American history, right next to Santa Barbara, California. To really understand what happened, we need to set the scene. Let's rewind the clock to early 1942. For a student living in California, life was a strange mix of normal and not so normal. The country was at war, and everyone knew it. There were posters everywhere. You might have had a brother, an uncle, or a neighbor who had enlisted. The news on the radio was filled with reports from distant battlefields. Names of faraway places like Iwo Jima or Burma suddenly felt incredibly important. It was a time of great patriotism, but also a time of anxiety. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, had changed everything. Before that, the war felt like someone else's problem. But after that day, the threat felt real. On the West Coast especially, fears of a Japanese invasion were rampant. Blackouts were ordered up and down the coast. Imagine your entire city, plunged into darkness every single evening. For a student, this new reality would have been both scary and a little bit exciting. School life probably continued, with homework, with friendships. But now there were air raid drills to practice. You'd learn to quickly and quietly file into the hallways. You'd see military vehicles similar to these on the roads more often. You'd see soldiers in uniform everywhere. The war was not talked about out loud. It was in the hushed, quiet conversations you sometimes overheard. This was the atmosphere in Santa Barbara, California in February 1942. It was a community holding its breath. Hard to believe from our perspective in 2025. No one truly believed it would happen to them. An attack was something that happened in other places, to other people. They were about to find out just how wrong they were, and that the war was much closer than any of them could have ever imagined. The day of the attack, February 23, 1942, began like any other Monday in Santa Barbara. It was a cool, clear winter day. For our student, it meant the start of another school week. Your mind on your classes, plans with friends. That evening, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was scheduled to give one of his famous fireside chats on the radio. These broadcasts were a national event. Families all across America would gather to hear their president's reassuring voice. Imagine that in 2025. The sun set over the Pacific, and the nightly blackout procedures began. A few miles out to sea, hidden beneath the surface of the dark water, something was stirring. No one could have known that just as the president was speaking of taking the fight to the enemy was preparing to bring the fight directly to them. The Japanese submarine I-17 had surfaced. On its deck, Japanese sailors worked quickly and quietly. They were preparing the sub's main weapon, a 14-centimeter deck gun. The commander of the I-17, Kozo Nishino, had a personal history with this very spot. Years before the war, he had been employed at the Elwood facility as an immigrant laborer. It was about 7:15 p.m. The first shell screamed out of the darkness. It was a loud, high-pitched whistle followed by a deafening explosion. One of the oil workers thought a plane had crashed. No one's first thought was an attack. Then another shell hit, and another. The ground shook. Now they knew. For our student, living a few miles away, the sound would have been a deep, deafening blast that rattled their windows. Panic started to set in. People rushed out of their houses, looking north up the coast. The phone lines immediately became jammed, all asking the same question: what is happening? The target of the shelling was the Bankline Oil Company refinery in the surrounding area called Elwood. One shell landed just a few feet from a gasoline storage tank, but incredibly, failed to detonate. The attack lasted for about 20 minutes. To the people on the ground, it felt like an eternity. The dreamlike quality of life in Santa Barbara had been shattered. The war had arrived on their doorstep. Let's take a closer look at the weapon at the center of this story. The I-17 was a Type B-1 submarine. This was not some small coastal patrol sub. It was a massive vessel, a long-range cruiser submarine. The primary weapon used was the submarine's 14-centimeter naval gun. This was a 5.5-inch deck gun. It could fire a shell weighing about 84 pounds over a distance of several miles. The psychological effect of this weapon was arguably more important. The I-17 and its deck gun were instruments of terror, using their deck gun to fire a terrifying warning shot across the bow of America. When the sun rose on the morning of February 24th, it revealed a scene of almost no damage. The physical destruction was surprisingly minimal. One shell had destroyed a wooden catwalk, damaged a pump house, about $500 in damages in 1942 money. Shrapnel was scattered across the site. Souvenir hunters were grabbing fragments. Imagine a kid finding twisted enemy metal in their backyard. That really happened. The physical damage was light, but the psychological damage was heavy. The attack proved the Pacific Ocean wasn't the best deterrent. The home front was now part of the battlefield, and life on the California coast would never feel quite as safe again. In the immediate aftermath, the official response was a mix of downplaying the event and scrambling to figure out what went wrong. This atmosphere of heightened fear and frayed nerves set the stage for one of the most bizarre incidents of the entire war. Just one night after the Elwood shelling, chaos erupted over Los Angeles. Air raid sirens blared across the city. Searchlights sliced through the night sky. For several hours, anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, blasting thousands of shells into the sky. When dawn broke, there was no evidence of any Japanese planes. The official explanation from the Secretary of the Navy was war nerves. Jumpy gunners had mistaken a weather balloon for an enemy bomber. It showed that the real weapon of the I-17 wasn't its 5.5-inch gun, but fear itself. The Elwood shelling served as a massive wake-up call, replaced by a massive, urgent effort to turn California into a fortress. The beaches, once places of recreation, were now laced with barbed wire and dotted with machine gun nests. Large coastal artillery guns were installed at key points, like Point Loma in San Diego and up the coast in Santa Monica. The skies were now filled with the constant drone of patrol bombers and fighter aircraft. For a student, the attack had made war real and terrifying. It was the end of a certain kind of American innocence. It was the night the war came home. Decades have passed since that chaotic night, and the Santa Barbara coastline has changed dramatically. Today, you won't find loud clanking oil derricks. Instead, the Elwood Bluffs protected open space. But the history of that February night is still here, whispering to those who listen. At key points, you'll find plaques recounting the Japanese attack. Standing there, reading about explosions while looking at the calm blue ocean, powerful and chilling. It's crazy to think that the Japanese came all the way from Japan just to attack a little town near Santa Barbara. Besides, the real adventure for a historical detective like me is searching for the actual scene of the attack. Using old maps and photographs, it's possible to pinpoint the approximate locations where the shells landed. If you explore the bluffs, you can still find traces of the military buildup that followed the shelling. These are not scars from the attack itself, but part of the fear that gripped California. The faint, overgrown traces of that defensive buildup is all that is left of that time period. The most powerful way this history is preserved is through the stories of the people who lived it. Reading these accounts is like stepping into a time machine. You can read the words of the oil field workers who scrambled for cover. Another story tells of how some local men like these guys grabbed their own hunting rifles and headed to the beach, ready to fight off a Japanese invasion. For someone visiting today, engaging with these stories is the ultimate way to understand what happened. Suddenly, the peaceful landscape is populated by the ghosts of the past. It's a reminder that history is not just about dates and military hardware, it's about people. These voices are the most important of all. Alright, so you've heard the incredible story, now you're feeling that pull of adventure. So let's talk logistics. Question: how do you get from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara? Option 1, rent a car. Option 2, Amtrak Pacific Surfliner. Option 3, bus services. Renting a standard car will cost you about $100. A round-trip Amtrak, around $100. The bus is the cheapest and the most unsafe at around $25. Whichever route you choose, the journey itself is a first step in understanding this forgotten story. Once you've arrived, you'll need a base of operations for your expedition. You can expect a standard hotel room to cost around $200. An Airbnb room might be closer to $100 a night. An explorer cannot function on history alone. Plan on a food budget of around $150 per person. So, let's tally up the estimated cost. That brings your total mission cost from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara, California for one night to roughly $600. It's a small price compared to the incredible return, a chance to be where history happened. Our journey has taken us from the sunny and quiet pre-war California to a terrifying night. We've come a long way, and hopefully this never happens again. This expedition reminds us that history is everywhere. My name is Jason, and I hope this has inspired you to ask questions and to look out for stories that have been forgotten. Thank you for joining me on this expedition. Until next time.